guys, welcome back to another episode of Crue Trime. If you are new here, hello, hi, hello. My name is Sarah, and what I do here is tell you a terrible story to ruin your day and put on my makeup at the same time. So if you are into that kind of combination, then you are in the right place. So make sure that you hit the subscribe button and the bell notification and all of those things so that you never miss one of my terrible stories. Today's story takes us to the state that gave us the delicious treats of Kool-Aid and Chef Boyardee, two of my favorites. It's also the birthplace of 911 emergency communications, which is now used all across the land. Today, we're going to Nebraska. So I don't typically do trigger warnings on these kinds of videos because they're all really terrible topics. But I wanted to take special care today to point out that today's video features some discussions about gender identity, misgendering, and some victim blaming. Also, my research partner Jeannie has a personal connection to this case, and it was particularly difficult for her to read a lot of the interviews and the articles, especially the interview with the sheriff, and you'll understand why when we get to it. So a very special thank you is in order for Jeannie today. Thank you, Jeannie. This is the story of Brandon Teena. On December 12th of 1972 in Lincoln, Nebraska, Joanne Brandon gave birth to a girl that she named Teena Renee Brandon. Ooh, that's maybe too much moisturizer. The baby's father, 19-year-old Patrick, had sadly passed away in an alcohol-related car accident when Joanne was just barely pregnant at that time. They also had a toddler at home, a baby girl named Tammy. Joanne, as you can imagine, was devastated. She was also very young, only 16 years old. So Lincoln, Nebraska in the early 70s was quite conservative, and Joanne didn't have money or means and struggled quite a bit to raise the kids while still a kid herself. So unable to support herself and the children, Joanne moved back home with her mother. A few short years later, Joanne met and later married a man named Jug. I wasn't able to find his actual name. I don't imagine that his government name was Jug, but anyways, so Jug was a decent man, and a good father to these two kids. They were a happy family, and Jug spoiled the kids, taking them camping and teaching them to ride bikes and buying them whatever toys they wanted. Tammy was like a girly girl, wearing dresses and playing with dolls, and her room was just filled with stuffed animals. Teena was more of a tomboy, preferring t-shirts and jeans and collecting street signs and more traditionally boy things. In the early years, Joanne seemed to understand and relate to Teena, having considered herself to be a tomboy as well when she was growing up. So she even made a deal with Teena to only ever have to wear dresses and get her hair all done, only on special occasions. So by 1980, Joanne's marriage to Jug eventually failed. He left her for another woman. And little Teena was especially crushed. Sister Tammy would later say, quote, "It was like he died." So when Tammy and Teena were in their grade school years, they attended Catholic school, both grade school and high school, the same Catholic schools that Joanne had gone to growing up. Tammy and Teena would play pretend mass, and Teena would play the priest role, even at one point telling Tammy about wanting to eventually become a priest. That's silly, there's no such thing as a female priest, Tammy thought. Well, this notion wasn't silly to Teena at all. Around adolescence, pre-teen years, Teena began to understand that he was a boy, not a girl. This is the late 80s, Nebraska. There wasn't really language for that yet, At best, the terms transvestite or transsexual were used, among other really rude and crass terms that we don't use anymore. Trans or gender variant people wasn't even a conversation at the time. But Teena started to go by the name Teen. As a side note, there's actually many other names that were used, including Teena, Teena Ray, Billy, Charles, and finally Brandon, for the sake of just keeping things less confusing. Since the names kind of over the years changed around, we're just gonna go straight to Brandon. Well, Joanne didn't understand Brandon at all. She thought that her daughter, Teena, was a lesbian. She did not approve at all, and she would sabotage any relationship or even just a sniff of a relationship that she saw forming. She didn't approve of such behavior. She knew that Teena and Tammy had been molested by a family member and figured that this was somehow related to that. Anyways, many years after all this, Joanne would later come to change her views on things, but we'll get to that. Cut ahead a couple years, the now 12-year-old Brandon met a girl at a school basketball game named Sarah. Well, the two of them became fast friends, confiding in their own struggles that they were going through at home. Brandon shared the experience of being abused by an uncle, and Sarah's mother was abusive to her and her siblings, using religion to justify her behavior. Anyways, Sarah was a loyal friend who knew the truth about Brandon from the start and never judged it. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, the two Brandon siblings attended Catholic school in Lincoln, Nebraska. Brandon was quiet, and a bit awkward, but very kind. The students at the school had to wear uniforms, and since Brandon identified more masculine, he chose to wear the pants and shirt with tie instead of a skirt. And once he started presenting more masculine, he became more outgoing and outspoken in class, which, would get him in trouble a little bit. He got into some heated discussions with faculty regarding abstinence and homosexuality. As high school graduation approached, everything changed for Brandon. At the beginning of senior year, a U.S. Army recruiter visited the school, and he wanted to enlist, but he had to wait until his 18th birthday to do so. As senior year went on, Brandon's grades started to slip, and he started skipping classes and just, kind of acting out. It continued to escalate until he was finally expelled from the high school in June of 1991, just 3 days before graduation. Okay, well, let's just back it up a few months before that expulsion. Brandon did go to the U.S. Army recruiting office and took the entrance exam. Because he listed his sex on the forms as male, he was disqualified. So Brandon identified to many people as intersex, meaning that, the downstairs anatomy doesn't necessarily fit what's typical for the definition of male or female biologically. He also sometimes referred to himself as hermaphrodite, which means that there's some kind of combination of male or female genitalia. The thing is, in Brandon's case, that wasn't actually accurate, either of those scenarios, at least not, anatomy-wise. But again, there just wasn't language to understand, gender fluidity, non-binary, or even, that a person's gender isn't only determined by their wedding tackle. Get what I'm saying? So around the same time as that rejection from the Army, Brandon, still living with his mother, answered the phone. It was a wrong number, somebody asking for Billy. The person on the other end of that phone call was a 13-year-old girl who lived nearby named Liz Delano. Long story short, Liz and Billy hit it off, flirting on the phone, and eventually agreeing to meet up at a local roller rink to go skating. I'm squinting at the age difference, but let's just let that be for a second, because Brandon wasn't presenting as like a average corn-fed. Who's that? Typical 18-year-old corn-fed Nebraska boy. Brandon presented a more youthful appearance, younger teenage. So this meetup at the roller rink was kind of the beginning of Brandon starting to settle into his gender identity and sexuality. He had, by this time, dated a few other girls and was described by all of them to be like the ideal guy, Very handsome, very caring, attentive. He knew what girls wanted because he had the inside scoop. Is that in poor taste? Probably. Also, with most of these young girls that he dated, he did not reveal that he was transgendered. Well, soon enough, he met and got more serious with a girl named Heather. In the summer of 1991, Brandon/Billy at this time was working as a gas station attendant. And if you live in New Jersey, you know exactly what this is and you're used to this. Well, gas station attendants used to exist all over. An actual person comes out and pumps your gas for you and washes your window. It's a delight. Anyways, so Brandon was saving up money from this job to buy a trailer for he and Heather to move into. Now, in this particular relationship, Brandon had revealed to Heather that he was a hermaphrodite, but then later had a sex change surgery, which we know neither of those to be accurate. Well, Heather didn't care. You know, she loved Brandon. And for anybody who's wondering, like, how did people not know? Brandon never let anybody touch his downstairs swimsuit area. He was also waiting for marriage. So that explains that. So Brandon is working as a gas station attendant, saving money, and at this point has even moved into Heather's family home. Okay, so the relationship with Heather was actually pretty tough because neither of their mothers approved. So Joanne, Brandon's mother, was calling Heather's mother's house and telling her that she was harboring 2 lesbians, basically going to burn in hell. Heather's mom eventually got a restraining order against Joanne because she was so nuts. How could she say something like that about somebody as lovely as Brandon? Now, as the relationship grew and time went on, Brandon developed some sticky fingers. Since he was presenting and living as a man, his ID card didn't match. So it was difficult for him to get a job or keep a job, so he would steal credit cards and forge checks. And most of the stolen money was actually used to buy gifts from the people he was stealing it from. So Brandon had stolen one of Heather's mom's credit cards and used it to buy an engagement ring set for Heather, which at first, Heather was super into, but then when she found out that it was stolen, she wasn't really into that so much. So this pattern of relationships, it repeated over and over and over. Brandon would enter into a relationship with somebody, there would be some fraud and theft, stealing situation, and then there would be a terrible breakup. After the last breakup, Brandon kind of went into a tailspin. Stopped eating, wasn't sleeping, whittled down to like under 100 pounds. His good friend Sarah and his mother Joanne were very worried. In January of 1992, Brandon attempted suicide. So after a brief hospitalization, Brandon was transferred to the Lancaster County Crisis Management for further treatment. After much counseling and therapy, he was formally diagnosed in February 1992 as having transsexualism personality disorder, which is now termed gender dysphoria. It was also at that time that Brandon revealed to his mother Joanne that he wanted to have a sex change operation, which we would now call gender affirming surgery. So after this, Brandon seemed to turn the corner. He was doing much better and had a few more relationships while he continued on his gender journey. He also planned a few times to have top surgery, like to remove his breasts so he wouldn't have to bind them down anymore. But he just was never able to afford it, unfortunately. On top of all of this, Brandon's criminal record was getting longer and longer, and all of those forgeries and thefts were catching up and the heat was on in Lincoln. So he decided to move 85 miles away to move in with his friend Carrie Gross that lived in Falls City, Nebraska. Plus, nobody in Falls City would know about his past as Teena. So once in Falls City, Carrie introduced Brandon to her friend and brother's ex-girlfriend, Lisa Lambert. Lisa actually lived outside of town in Humboldt in an old farmhouse with her son, 7-month-old Tanner. Carrie's brother wasn't Tanner's dad. It was some other shithead that had left her high and dry, who's not important to the story. New in town, Brandon began working at a nursing home and everyone loved him. Lisa and Brandon grew to be very close friends. Brandon loved hanging out with Lisa at her house, watching movies and just playing with little Tanner. It was a really nice family vibe that he just really enjoyed. Brandon complimented Lisa's parenting, which was really nice because Lisa's mother was not nice. Very judgmental about her having a child out of wedlock, because that's just so helpful. On December 12th, 1993, Brandon's 21st birthday, he met Lana Tisdale, friend of Lisa's that he'd seen around town. They hit it off, and Lana invited Brandon to a gathering at her house. Also at her house that night were like all of her friends, the gang. Included in that group was her best friend Leslie Lauder, her brother John Lauder, and another friend, Tom Neeson. Everyone loved Brandon straight away. He fit right in, and he and Lana were officially an item. So the timeline for the rest of this is incredibly short, so there's a lot kind of packed into the last just month. Oh, and by the way, Brandon was only living in Falls City for like a month before he met Lana. Okay, so just 4 short days after getting together with Lana, one of Brandon's forged checks caught up with him and he was arrested. Now, since Brandon was legally known as Teena Brandon, after he was arrested, he was put in the women's holding facility at the jail in Falls City. So in previous arrests, Brandon would typically call his girlfriends to bail him out. But in this instance, Brandon wanted to keep Teena a secret from Lana, so he didn't call her. Well, nonetheless, Lana came to his rescue. Her father had given her a blank check to get her hair done, but instead of doing that, she took that check somewhere else and with the help of somebody else raised the money, I guess, for Brandon's bail. Now, from what I've seen, Lana still at this point doesn't believe that Brandon isn't who she thinks. She even told police that she had seen visual proof that Brandon was a Brandon and not a Teena. Do you get what I'm saying? The jig was kind of up, right? Why was Brandon held in the female section of the jail? Tom Neeson started kind of doing the math. Brandon was physically small, had very soft features, had a higher pitched voice. You know, he was squinting. So once he was out of jail, Brandon rode along with Lisa and Leslie to go pick up Leslie's boyfriend, Phil Devine, who was visiting in from out of town. Now, 22-year-old Phil Devine had his shit together. He had a great job and a very impressive educational background, despite having a pretty tough upbringing. You know, he had suffered a lot of medical complications and conditions as a child, but he pushed through it and was thriving. So as I said, he and Leslie were dating and he had come to stay with her for a time because Leslie was sort of struggling. She had recently been let go from her job. Phil and Leslie also had a child together and the relationship was a little volatile. A lot of drama and like jealousy and stuff that's not really important to the story. Okay, so it's a small town and word about Brandon being in the women's section of the jail spread, and the report about the arrest was published in the newspaper in the blotter, but the article read Teena Renee Brandon. Well, of course, gossip spread and the town was calling Lisa and Lana lesbians, like that's some kind of insult or whatever, but I guess in small town Nebraska in like the early 90s, a little dangerous. Okay, so cut to a few days later, it's Christmas Eve, and they're all at Tom Neeson's house. They're all drinking and carrying on, and then they started in on Brandon, you know, teasing and saying that they could revoke his bail and send him back to jail, blah, blah, blah. And it escalated, then things got really disgusting. At first, John Lauder took Brandon to the garage and cornered him and told him to drop his pants and prove that he was male. Brandon was able to kind of negotiate his way out of that, but the peace didn't last long because soon Tom Neeson joined in. These two half-wit potatoes attacked Brandon in the bathroom. They pulled his shirt up over his head and pulled down his pants all the way to his ankles. When they saw what they saw, they decided that Brandon was not a man, and they also forced Lana to look. These two shitheads forced Brandon into a car later, and then they drove out to the boonies, ending up at the Hormel meatpacking plant. They took turns beating him and raping him, brutalizing and humiliating him, and then when they were done, they asked, "We're still buddies, right?" They then threatened to kill him if he ever even spoke a word about what happened that night. Then they drove back to Tom's house and they made Brandon shower to presumably get rid of evidence. Well, scrappy old Brandon, while the shower was running, he escaped out of the bathroom window and then ran off to Lana's house. So Brandon was taken by ambulance to a local hospital and was treated for severe facial injuries, and a rape kit was administered. Now, since this crime occurred out in the country, the case was transferred from the police to the sheriff. Sheriff Charles Locks took over. So this sheriff was, how do I say this? A piece of shit. He didn't take the case seriously at all. In fact, he was an ignorant bigot.
Well, let's back up here for a second. First of all, you didn't say anything about him getting it up. Did he have a hard-on when he got back there or what?
I don't know. I didn't look.
He didn't look. Did he take a little time working it up or what? Did you work it up for him?
No, I didn't.
He was demeaning, accusatory, and dehumanizing in the questions to Brandon, blaming him for basically inviting this attack by, quote, putting herself off as a guy.
The girls that don't know about you think you're a guy. Do you kiss them?
What happened last night?
And also referring to him as it. Sheriff Locks interviewed John Lauder and Tom Neeson, but did not arrest them, determining that what occurred was consensual.
Disgusting!
Okay, so who were Tom Neeson and John Lauder? Well, normally, I really like to go into the backstories of everyone involved in these cases, but I gotta say, today, not interested. Long story short, these two men were shitty shitheads. They were both fully immersed in the cycle of violence, having both grown up in unstable, abusive homes. They both had long criminal records. They both had histories of drug abuse and mental illness, and they didn't have stable jobs, and they were going nowhere fast. So they've attacked Brandon, kidnapped and raped. And Brandon, despite having been threatened by these men, filed charges.
Brandon took refuge here at friend Lisa Lambert's farmhouse in Humboldt. Brandon was hiding from John Lauder and Tom Neeson, who were looking for revenge after Brandon reported them for rape.
Now, about a week after the attack on Brandon, in the very early morning hours of New Year's Eve, so December 31st, 1993, John Lauder and Tom Neeson showed up at Lisa Lambert's house in Humboldt. Phil was staying there because he had had a fight with Leslie, and Lisa and her son, little baby Tanner, were there because, they live there, duh. Tom and John arrived, they located Brandon, they figured out that he was there, and they got to the house and they kicked down the door. Now, Tom and John have different versions of what occurred next, but basically, it all ended with Lisa, Brandon, and Phil being shot execution style, although nothing else in the house had been disturbed, so that just told investigators later that this was not a robbery. At the foot of Lisa's waterbed was Brandon Teena. He'd been shot twice in the head and stabbed once in the abdomen. Tom Neeson would say that he was stabbed because he was twitching. They wanted to make sure he was dead. That leaves two witnesses, right? So also, on the other side of the bed was Lisa. She had been shot 3 times. Her face was destroyed. And in the living room was Phil Devine. He had been shot once in the head. The baby Tanner was left in his crib, probably because he couldn't talk to identify them as the killers. So after they left Lisa's house, these two ding-dongs, they took off the yellow work gloves that they had been wearing. Then they took the gun and knife that was used in the murders, plural, and they put them inside of an ammunition box that had Lauder written on the side of it. Then they drove off across the Nemaha Bridge and threw it over the side into the river. Listen, you guys, it was December 31st in Nebraska. The river was frozen. So this gift box, essentially, was generously left for the sheriff's department on a frozen piece of the river, and all it needed was a bow. Well, later that day, the county attorney, Doug Mers, says that he issued warrants, like arrest warrants, for Tom and John. There's a lot of muddiness around when the warrant was actually issued, and the whole case was almost thrown out because of it, but the two mouth breathers were arrested and charged for the murders of Brandon, Lisa, and Philip. Tom Neeson's trial was first. He was found guilty of the first-degree murder of Brandon Teena and 2 counts of second-degree murder for Philip Devine and Lisa Lambert. In exchange for his testimony against John Lauder, oh yeah, he turned on him. course he did. In exchange for that testimony, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In John Lauder's trial, he was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of use of a weapon to commit a felony, and he was sentenced to death. Now, of course, both of these men have appealed their sentences, and those appeals have been denied many, many times. Now, as late as 2021, John Lauder's attorney has filed an appeal on the grounds of John's low IQ, ergo intellectual disability. Apparently, at the time of his sentencing, his IQ was measured at 92, but newer testing now show that his IQ is 67. And since there are restrictions on imposing death on those with intellectual disabilities, his sentence could very well be commuted to life without parole. If I knew that I could just take a new IQ test to prove that I could get my sentence lowered, it'd be real low. Just saying. Either way, neither one of these shitheads are getting out of prison anytime soon. During the trials, there were protesters and activists that came to the area trying to bring awareness to the situation. Similarly to what happened a few years later with Matthew Shepard, Brandon Teena's abrupt end was not in vain. In death, he opened our world to acceptance and trust. And many of the earlier articles on this story kind of focus on the wrong things, that he was a deceiver. Many of those articles have been addressed in recent years and apologies issued. As I mentioned, my research partner Jeannie knew Brandon, and in her words, she says, he wasn't a deceiver. He was just a boy trying to make it in the world and trying to find love and family. He was such an amazing friend, and I miss him every day. There's a really incredible article that was written by John Gregory Dunne, published in 1997 in The New Yorker about this case. I'll link it down below if you want to read it. 10 out of 10 recommend. The 1999 feature film Boys Don't Cry, directed by Kimberly Pierce, is absolutely worth the watch if you've never seen it. Hilary Swank actually won the Academy Award for her portrayal of Brandon Teena, and she thanked him in her acceptance speech.
His legacy lives on through our movie to remind us to always be ourselves, to follow our hearts, to not conform. I pray for the day when we not only accept our differences, but we actually celebrate our diversity.
The film does take some artistic liberties with some of the real-life characters who didn't love that, and it actually took Joanne Brandon many years to find peace with the world at large knowing her son's story. But she now appreciates that it did give transgender advocates a platform, and she's glad of that. Now, Sheriff Charles Laux, the walking, talking, rotting pumpkin, was sued by Joanne Brandon for failing to prevent Brandon's death and was eventually awarded $80,000, with additional lawsuits and damages awarded over the years, the last one coming in 2001. 73-year-old Charles B. Laux died on March 30th, 2021. Bye! And that, friends, is the story of Brandon Teena. If you are interested to know what makeup I used in this look today, I know it's a little wild, but I went for it. Just look down in the description box. Everything is linked for you. Thank you so much again to Jeannie for helping me tell this story today. I appreciate you so much. And thank you for hanging out today and for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you want to see more videos like this one, then remember to subscribe to this channel before you leave today. I upload new videos here on YouTube every week, and you can follow me on most of the other socials. That is it for now. I will catch you next time in the next video. Bye! It's so weird, the frame rate, what it does to your lips. He had been beaten Tisdall, Jesus. Brandon. It's credit card. Shit. I don't know where my fan is. Girl. Cannot reach this. It's too much. To the state.